Thank you very much, Tim. Thanks. Wow, it is so great to be here. I have a confession to make. I have not been on stage since before COVID. In fact, I had a massive stroke in October 2019. It is only by the grace of God and a miracle that I am here speaking to you today. And do I have a story for you? And how do all good stories start? Well, once upon a time, I had a wonderful life. My wife and I were traveling the world, had a mansion on the river, owned a place in the Virgin Islands. We loved our lifestyle and never thought it would end, but it did. And I found myself here, in prison, in solitary confinement for protective custody. Inside was cold, dreary, and very, very lonely. Welcome to the hole. This is what I looked like 28 days after spending in the hole. And they didn't even ask me to smile. If you can believe that. So never complain about your driver's license again. So you're probably wondering two things, I would imagine. The first being, who is this guy that looks like an axe murderer, and why was he invited here to speak to you? Well, the simple answer is that I was a corporate executive, white-collar professional, just like most of you in this room, and I am here today to help you and your colleagues stay out of prison so you do not have to have your picture taken like this. The details? Well, I was a VP of a real estate development company, and I was based in Atlanta, but the company was based in North Carolina. And it was a real estate development company, and we had a project in the mountains of North Carolina. We sold over 350 lots in that development, and each of those lots was sold with 80% bank financing, and the company provided the other 20% as a second loan. So the buyers put no money down. The kicker was that second loan was not on the HUD closing statements, and that's bank fraud. Also, each of those buyers were promised that the company would complete that project or those lots would obviously become worthless. But over time, the owners of that company, my bosses, ran into significant financial problems. It became very evident to me and to the buyers of those lots that the company was not going to be able to complete that project. So the buyers started complaining to the North Carolina Attorney General's office and to the U.S. Attorney's office. Eventually, this brings me back to a day I will never, ever forget. I'm sure you've all had these days before. I was down in Sarasota, came back to Atlanta, and just as the wheels touched the ground, I did what everybody in this room does when they land. I turned on my phone. It rang immediately. It was our in-house counsel, a man who I had just seen 2 hours previously. But with his voice breaking, he read me a news release from the North Carolina Attorney General's office announcing they had just filed a lawsuit against the company, all of its officers, including me and him, and they shut the company down. I'm sure I was white as a ghost. Matter of fact, I was as white as a ghost. I had the phone just up against my my ear so the other passengers couldn't hear what the call was. I didn't say a thing. The final sentence of that news release said, the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI were investigating. I was stunned. I was totally stunned. I had seen a lot of shaky things going on with the owners of that company, but I never thought there would be a criminal investigation. But there was. And I was under investigation by the feds, of all people. Now, the feds were not accusing me of directly defrauding anybody. No, they were accusing me of conspiracy. The Fed's theory being that even though I was in Atlanta and had nothing directly to do with that project, as an officer of the company, I should have known that there was a fraud going on, and the fact that I did nothing to stop it or walk away from it must have meant that I participated in it. So I know another thing that you're all probably thinking about, right? Well, that's what I thought too, but I was sorely mistaken. Consider this, as small business owners, there are 5,000 criminal laws, another 10,000 to 300,000 federal regulations that can get you put in prison. Far too many for any one person to know. And by the way, not knowing that you are breaking the law is not a defense. Once I understood these numbers, I understood that the feds could find something, anything on me. And I believe the same is true for everyone in this room. So the criminal investigation went on for 2.5 years, during which time I spent about $250,000 staying ahead of the feds. But finally, the assistant U.S. attorney called my attorney with an ultimatum. Foster must plead guilty or the government will indict. But I wanted to plead not guilty. I wanted to prove my innocence. But my attorney laid out the legal ramifications of going to trial. So let's remember there are 350 lots that were sold in that development. Each HUD closing was one felony count of 5 years each. That is 350 times 5. That's 1,750 years in prison that they can go after me for. Wow. That's just amazing. So let's remember that this is conspiracy. So all the feds needed was one text, one email, one meeting that I attended, something, almost anything to prove that I touched the conspiracy in some way, and I was liable for the whole $100 million conspiracy. And the feds had 1 million pages of documents, and all my co-defendants had already pleaded out with cooperation incentives. Remember when I said the feds could find something, anything? Do you think they could find something in 1 million pages of documents? And do you think that those 6 other people would be able to say something to try to save themselves? So ultimately, I only really had 2 options. I can go to trial. My attorney advised me that he wanted $1 million in legal fees. I had to give him $350,000 that day, and I would have to prove to him where I could come up with this other $650. Money I didn't have, and he thought I would lose. I was looking at least 20 years in prison and probably closer to 30. The assistant U.S. attorney had already told my attorney they were going to try to go for as many years as they possibly could. I would probably never see my family again. Or I could plead guilty to 1 count. There would be no more legal fees. I would see my family. Family again. But I would have to serve some time in prison. What would you do? Would you go to trial to prove your innocence, or would you plead guilty? Well, life is full of options, and sometimes those options are lousy, and that was certainly the case here. For better or for worse, I decided to plead guilty to 1 count of conspiracy. I would spend 37 months in federal prison. I learned about conspiracy the hard way. Most white-collar offenders do not realize that going along with a bad situation can get them in a ton of trouble. Do you ever think about those small decisions that appear harmless and inconsequential enough that the possible consequences don't even enter your mind? Isn't it when you are far down the path to personal ruin that you look back and realize how slippery it was. That was me. I never thought I could be tied up in this mess. And most people do not realize how close they are from facing the same thing that I faced. So let's go back to that one day that I'll never forget, the day that I arrived in Atlanta and found out about that news release, and the day that I knew that my day would change forever. My wife picked me up from the airport that afternoon. I'm sure when I entered that car, I was still white as a ghost, and I was still in a state of shock. I told her about the criminal investigation, told her about the lawsuit. I told her that our lives would change forever and that we would probably lose everything that we had. I loved her too much to put her through the agony that I knew was sure to come. Then and there, I offered her a divorce and everything we owned, and she just said, for better or for worse. Now that is true love. At least I did something right in my life. My wife would drive from Atlanta to North Carolina just about every other weekend to visit me in prison. And this is us during visitation in my prison greens. She stuck with me the entire time, where my experience is that 80% of all marriages end when one is incarcerated. She was also the one who noticed that I was having a stroke, and she stuck with me through my stroke and through all my recovery, and to this day, I would not be here without her faith and love. Thank you. Thank you very much. When your ego is a little out of control and some temptation is staring you in the face and you are feeling outside pressure and you question the integrity of the people around you, do not resort to stinking thinking, but think about the consequences of a questionable decision, if not for your career, your freedom, then for your family. I wish I had. And this is another way to say, if something does not feel right to you in your gut, step back and take another look at it, because trust me, it doesn't take much to step on the wrong side of the line. Now, everything that happened to me had to happen for a greater purpose than my incarceration, and I don't believe there are accidents or coincidences. The fact that you are here listening to my story today is no accident. I pray that for some of you, or maybe just one of you, my words today will be useful for you to avoid the slippery slope. As you leave today, I ask that you not make the same mistakes I did. And one more time, I would like to introduce you to my hero, my wife, Christine Foster, sitting behind over there. Give her a round of applause, please. Thank you, hon. Thank you very much, honey.
Thank you, Kevin. This could never happen to me. How many times have you heard that before?